Happy Monday. You're watching Business World Live. I'm Danie, Laurel.
And in just Delos, Santos is the start of a new trading day and a new trading week at that. But first, let's go. A Business World poll of 16 analysts yielded a median estimate of 2.3%, slower than the actual figure of 2.4% in August. This is also within the 1.8% to 2.6% range given by the Banco Central. The September reading will be released tomorrow, October 6th. Continuum Economics says downward pressure likely came from food and non-alcoholic beverages components, while ING Bank Manila's Nikki Mapa says lower utility and oil prices may have contributed to slower inflation, citing a downtrend in oil prices. Last week, the Monetary Board also maintained overnight reverse repurchase rate at a record low of 2.25%, while lending rate was kept at 2.75% and deposit at 1.75%. Despite this, BSP Governor Ben Jocno says the central bank still has room to further ease policy rate, even as he thinks the worst, but notes that growth may be possible in the last quarter of the year. And speaking of growth, the Finance Department says the Philippines should adopt economic reforms to help the economy recover. Among the reforms it mentioned are the slashing of corporate income tax to 25% and streamlining tax incentives under the CREATE bill, allowing banks to offload bad loans to asset management firms under the FIST bill, and easing of foreign ownership restrictions through amendments to the 85. Dan, the peso has gone from strength to strength in 2020, but it has stayed in a narrow range after the BSP held last week. What's the latest on our local unit?
As you mentioned, Jess, take a look at my terminal here. You can see I mentioned 2020 has been an amazing year for the local unit. Recall that, once you see that chart sliding down, that means that our currency is actually strengthening here. We've seen this at the best in possibly 4 years at around a 4% gain, whereas the rest of the emerging market currencies have been seeing all the way until August. But as you mentioned, we've been trading at a very tight range here, a narrow range. And this, as you mentioned, Governor of the Central Bank, Ben Jocno, said the central bank still has room to further ease its money. Have said it's still possible. There's still a possibility of strengthening here, or up to 51 to a dollar. That's what he said in an interview with Bloomberg TV. And he did mention that the central bank will continue supporting the government's budget as long as this is needed during the pandemic. Now, recall that the government is actually issuing promissory notes to the central bank of around 540 billion pesos of borrowing. That's according to Ben Jocno. So the government tapping the central bank, asking it for funds to help, of course, support the spending that might be going on or that is needed during this pandemic crisis. Now let's take a step back and take a quick peek at our global of a percent, close to 1% actually, of the US here in Asia. It does seem to stage a recovery later on when the US markets open. Now recall that on Friday, there were so many things that were going on. In particular, President Donald Trump in the US had announced that he had contracted coronavirus together with his wife. However, what has happened over in the US, and this is what investors are saying, will be a bright spot when trading starts opening, and in 3% impressive, the Nikkei 225 as well. But also over in Korea, in South Korea, they're seeing gains of more than 1%. It's not the same picture for China, which of course is still closed. They're still on that holiday since last week. Now, on the stimulus front, there's a lot of ISPs when it comes to employment over in the US. And even from the hospital, Donald Trump was actually tweeting that a deal on a new over in Paris. So again, this pandemic, very exciting to be opening that. And take a look at this, 6,001.59. Finally, guys, breaking through that 6,000 level. It's been a while. That's just a gain of 0.04%. And in fact, this follows a session, you can see the past 3 days in my chart here, a bullish session where we saw us rising 0.9% on Friday. 5,999 was actually the level on Friday, so almost 6.8%. That was after seeing declines for 2 weeks straight. Also, a good thing was value turnover. So I'm just going to pull that out for you. If you can see that, just jumping here, the index volumes were really high. That was up by 26%. We had a weekly average trade of 5.31 billion. So it's actually better than what we've seen in previous months. even as net foreign selling is still going up. So again, foreigners jumping in terms of outflows. They're 70% of outflows just last week. Now, Chris Mangon of AAA Equity said there was little activity in the bourse the entire week last week until Thursday hit. And that shows that even as investors are still cautious, the overall movement shows they have not yet lost hope. Trade Asia is pointing to specific sectors here that are bound to perform well. He says residential real estate might be doing well. Improving mining is something that might be a bright spot as well. So very interesting times here and hoping that we stay above the 6,000 levels. Now, one thing though that Bain is saying, and I'm just going to pull out the MRR to see which firms are actually gaining here. Bain is saying that the Philippine conglomerates may need to adjust their business models to remain competitive after this coronavirus era or coronavirus world. They're saying that the pure plays, so those that are not in different, diversified industries, are now pure plays are generally outdoing conglomerates in terms of annual total shareholder return. But if you can see on my chart, MPIC up by 2.7%. Avoid this equity, however, not in the same fate. That is down by 1.33%.
All right, so definitely lots of things happen. Let's see if the index manages to at least sustain those gains that we've been seeing in the early Monday trade here. But then moving, zeroing in on the telco space, which has been the talk of the per months, the converged IPO term seems to be getting clearer, and the pricing is not as high as they had initially hoped for. What's the latest?
Range at 16 pesos and 50 centavos to 19 pesos each. Now, this is a departure from what they were hoping to price at up to 24 pesos. But we're going to be asking our analysts here, is that a good pricing? Is that a fair price? It, of course, always usually happens that, they don't necessarily get in the top range of the pricing. Nevertheless, they are expecting to raise between $512 million to $590 million at this new price range. Now, another very interesting point here is they've now gotten 8 cornerstone investors. Now, so many different, investors. They need to have big blocks, and they've now attracted 8 that will be getting these lot of offshore interest in this particular IPO. So they're expected to close the books on October 8th. That's just a few days from now. And the expected listing is going to be on October 26th. Now, meanwhile, towers across just Mindanao. So 880 Mindanao pa lang. That's going to include 237 in Davao, which is, of course, the hometown of the owner, Dennis Uy. And they are aiming to have this infrastructure in place for their March 2020 commercial launch. They've said several times, this will be happening by next, to not be stopping. You can see their price here at 5 pesos and 94 centavos, up already by 3% in just the first few minutes rather of trade. So more markets later in the broadcast, Jess, but anything, there's one more thing that's very, very interesting today, and that is the reopening of the school year. It's going to be the first distance learning school year ever, not just in the Philippines, but in the world. So how is this showing, let's say, difficulties and possibly cracks in the system?
Showing wide cracks at that, Dan, really. I mean, the authorities, of course, were really hard pressed to actually even start the school year. Remember, it was supposed to start last August, but then the president then decided, let's officially start this. Of course, the school year is going to pan out with a lot of connectivity issues remaining here. And like what you did mention, it's exposing really a lot of difficulties here. For one, there's digital divide that authorities have to consider here. There's also disparity when it comes to social status and even inequality here due to geographical location here. At the same time, you have the pandemic crippling really households and their ability at least to pay for necessary services to at least help in the schooling of their children. Now, in an interview with Radyo 5 earlier today, just to give you an idea, DepEd Undersecretary Nepomuceno Malaluan said that they are expecting 22.5 million students in public schools to start the school year today. That represents, in fact, 100% enrollment from last year's standing. Also, at the same time, they're saying, at least for the first quarter, at least 13 million of those students, or more than half, are going to receive their printed for the first 2 quarters. they are maintaining a 1:1 ratio for modules. So one student is equal to one module. Other half is preferring online digital material as well. And just yesterday, the DepEd also released their assessment scheme. Recall that last week there were, in fact, calls to at least develop a new grading system for the students this school year. Instead of the traditional numerical system, they were pushing for a pass and fail scheme instead. But this time, the DepEd is saying that the students will be assessed based on their performance and summative assessment. So that includes quizzes, oral presentations, and research projects. So that practically does away with periodical or the quarterly exams. Now, according to a latest study here from the Department of Education, you have a lot of parents, in fact, preferring modular learning or the use of modules here. That's totaling 8.8 million students. Vision, radio, and printed platforms as well. Now, 3.8 million actually prefer online. Now, time and again, we've heard of students, in fact, and parents struggling to get a gadget or pay for their connectivity fees or internet connection. But according to DepEd Undersecretary Jesus Mateo, there's really no need of information and communications. From last week said, citing official survey, internet access remains to be a challenge, especially for rural areas here. In Barm alone, in fact, 94.9% of households do not have net access, while in NCR, you'd be surprised, only around 32.3% of households actually have access to the internet. And we're not even talking about internet speed here. For urban areas, internet speed is only at 5.5 Mbps, while in Mindanao, it's a meager 1 Mbps. I mean, that really is way behind even the national average here of 3 Mbps. That despite the fact, that the Philippines has the cheapest fixed broadband rates, while at the same time having the most expensive mobile voice in the world. There are parents who are struggling because they do not have that sufficient level of literacy as well. Now, according to AMA Chief Operating Officer Christopher Satulan, distance learning hinges on the help of parents and guardians being distributed to students here. And Satulan is saying, it might actually take as much as 3 years to perfect distance learning materials. Some teachers even took it upon themselves to find ways on how to fund the printing of these materials. That's despite the fact that the DepEd has actually
to upskill and become teachers and are experiencing this. It's also private schools. We just showed even our universities that are listed here. There's even
You know what? Months leads already closing shop due to low enrollment. And the reason for this is that a lot of the parents actually lost their jobs. So what they in turn decided to do is to actually transfer their kids to public schools. In fact, if you try to take a look at the statistics here for private schools here, some of the private schools even had to cut their tuition fee rates while retaining the same amount of workforce just to keep the teachers in place here. So really what this is showing is that
well, we did, as you mentioned, connectivity plays a big role in that, and hoping for these rollouts of even cell phone towers, even fiber networks to be accelerated in this period.
Now, here are other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Barco says government policies have significantly increased the cost to do business in the country. That's on top of unnecessarily putting Filipino ownership at risk. Barco says such policies include the mandatory allocation of 12% of shipping capacity for agricultural products and providing preferential rates of as much as 40% for such cargo. However, the Maritime Industry Authority Marina Administrator Robert Empedrad also assured that a financial package will be given to domestic shippers under the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act. But of the 9.5 billion pesos allotted for the transport sector under the Bayanihan 2 law, only 2.6 billion pesos will be used to assist air, land, and sea transport sectors badly hit by the pandemic. Now, the government's financial support to state-run firms plunged 84% in August after a pause in the implementation of wage subsidy to GOCCs in August, which is also 72% lower compared with the 18 billion pesos released in July. For the first 8 months of the year, subsidies exceeded 190 billion pesos, which is almost a 100% increase from 2019 figures. This as the SSS rolled out a massive wage subsidy program to encourage employers to retain most of their workforce. Recall that subsidies and public support measures peaked during the period of hard, intensified lockdowns across the country.
To focus on agriculture, and Tebella said they are also in the process of expanding coverage of energy efficient systems in remote schools and health facilities. The department's Energy Utilization Management Bureau noted they are taking steps to mobilize investment through policy issuances and regulations outlined in the aid in creating energy efficient projects. The agency, though, has yet to issue its guidelines for EEC developers seeking endorsement for tax incentives from the Board of Investments. The industry is in line for 6 years of tax breaks under the Omnibus Investment Code. The 6,000 level has been a tough psychological ceiling to break for our local. And with us, Aaron Sai of First Metro Securities. However, Aaron, good morning, first of all. Sorry, good morning, Aaron.
Good morning.
I just wanted to jump in na kasi because I'm just seeing in my terminal here. Ay nako, we're 5990 na naman. I was so excited, as I opened the broadcast that we were breaching those levels again. Okay, what's going on? As the BSP decision was, widely expected naman there. What is going on here? Why that major pickup in the past?
It's really the telcos area, as in, with the frenzies into two new telcos, driving surges and prices na Chelsea and Dito, no? I think they were up around 37% last week. No? Also, now, Lao Corporation moved sideways for the past 2 to 3 months. Good thing that we have seen as a bottom at around 5.7. But it was a pretty interesting week actually last week for the PSEI. It was higher by 2.75%. And the market was up actually 4 out of the 5 trading days last week. Although we continues to see net foreign selling and the volume turnover, while it was higher than the previous weeks, around more than 5 billion, but it was still below average. No? So, but what's noteworthy about last week was actually the breaking out, or the breaking above resistance level of the PSCI. It has broken above the 50-day. Already also broke above its resistance level since the market climbed to 6,600. So it's interesting, no? But if the market decides to trade in a range, then we might see some resistance actually here. No, we might see some resistance at around 6,167 level, the previous reversal from the downtrend resistance, or more importantly, the 5,700 level. If we look at if we influenced by the fact that the earnings moving forward, more specifically the forward 12 months earnings, are still expected to drop around. But before today's trading, some index heavyweights have been exhibiting actually good pictures. No, SM Prime, AC, Ali, even the banks, the banking stocks. If they continue, I think it would be if this corrects maybe midday or later today, then maybe we can see the market maybe track a little higher, and maybe at the very least, maybe try.
Expected to be lower year on year. Now that's not a surprise, but will it be higher quarter on quarter at least, or are you actually seeing telltale signs that recovery might take a little bit longer than the third quarter? What are you pricing in?
Actually, the earnings that I mentioned a while ago was a forward 12 months earnings. So it would be the second half 2020 and 2021 first half. Definitely better. And as we have seen, although we have a 2-week interruption in August, the economy has been generally slowly reopening after in the good part of the third quarter. So definitely quarter and quarter would be good. However, as we know, the quarantine is still with us. Be a case to be comparing them, especially the cheers, as we are still in the quarantine period.
Okay, especially since an expectation now of the Christmas rally might be happening here, even in terms of stock price, but even in terms of
optimism, especially on the third quarter, or maybe spilling over to fourth quarter, is that the second quarter really was very dismal. So if we are to compare the first half and the second half, definitely I think definitely the second half should be better than our first half. But again, as the forward 12 months earnings expectations are still lower, no, a bit 10% lower than the previous 12 months. I think there's still a cost from some as a country that has really managed this very well.
Okay, gotcha. I think Jess is jumping in terms of the Converge IPO question because I'm
Yes.
very curious to
Hi,
also know.
Jess.
Go ahead, Jess.
Hello, Aaron. Let me just ask you very quickly here. Are you disappointed that the new pricing range here, released at least by
No, especially this is it's quite a big sized IPO. So based on the historical price, so definitely the lowering, the market is still not that well, very happy at that. No, so it remains to see whether the demand for converged shares would be good.
Okay, so baka better pricing pa, even better for investors. But as you mentioned, Aaron, telco area leading the charge here. Take a look at dito. It's still up by 8.2%. Now telecom as well, 7.5%. So still the telco story driving the markets as we start this trading week. Thank you so much. That was Aaron Saya, First Metro Securities.
Thank you.
catch us again tomorrow at 9:30 a.m. I am Jess Delos Santos. We are One News.